Good morning. Happy April 1st. It appears that Mother Nature may have an April Fool's joke for us because I heard today it might snow. Should the universe think it would also be fun to pull an April Fool's joke and we experience any connectivity issues today, please know that we will send everybody participating in this Lunch and Learn today a link following this, should that happen. Let's hope it doesn't, but should that happen. On behalf of the Campus Improvement Team, welcome to the fourth Lunch and Learn series for the spring semester. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. For those of you that I may not know, my name is Julie Cox. I'm an Associate Dean of Students, and I'm a member of the Campus Improvement Team. The purpose of these Lunch and Learns is to raise awareness about substance use, abuse, and mental health related issues. Attendees learn on our campus environment on ways to incorporate this information both into their teaching and their interactions with their students. Due to the pandemic, our sessions this semester are offered through a live stream event. Today's session title is The Color of Drinking: Alcohol is a Social Justice Issue, and it's led by our speaker today, Rianda Washington. Rianda is the Alcohol and Other Drug Prevention Coordinator at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you so much, Rianda, for agreeing to serve as our presenter today. Today's presentation does include an interactive worksheet that you can look in terms of further reflection or use. And to access this worksheet, you can click on the link below this video. For those that this is their first experience with the Lunch and Learn, so you know, every Lunch and Learn is about 50 minutes. So we'll run until about 12:20 today. We will end our presentation a few minutes early. And we ask that if you have questions that you submit them in the link below in our Qualtrics survey, and then we'll ask Rianda some questions at the end that you have provided for us. After this presentation, as always, we really value your feedback. So please fill out our assessment as it's critical for our future planning. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our speaker, Rianda.
Good morning or afternoon, because I'm in a different time zone than you all, in the Central Time Zone, but I'm Rianda Washington, and I will be presenting for you a little bit about some of the studies I've done on our campus around the color of drinking. I do want to give a trigger warning about some of the information I will be sharing, and also tell you all to take care of yourselves during this time, but I will be utilizing some students' shared and lived experiences from students on our UW campus, and it names violence that has happened to them and individuals, as well as at the community level. So I just want you all to be aware of that, and please take care of yourselves and do what you need to do. So to give you an outline of sort of what I'm going to be talking about and where I'm going to be going, I'm going to talk a little bit about influences and how we got to the color of drinking. So I will be talking a little bit about UW-Madison. I know you are all at Purdue, so I want you to think about, what does this look like on your campus when I talk about alcohol culture and racial climate? And what is similar, what is different? And then I will share the color of drinking results, and there is a booklet. I think I sent that before, and that might be on the website. If not, I also have a link in the slides that you can go link the book, and I will reference that. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the campus impacts and how people have used the data, and then just end with a quick summary. So hopping into everything, I work at UW-Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison. We have 45,000 students. We're an urban campus that is integrated into the city. We are a land-grant institution, a Research 1, and a Division 1. The other interesting thing that also layers in with all of these factors I will be talking about on our campus is 88% of our undergraduate students and families are in that fourth percentile of wealth. So on our campus, we have a lot of wealthy students or students' families, because we don't have a middle class and we have a very low income class. So there is a very big difference between the haves and the have-nots. And we do not have a middle class, which also adds into some of our dynamics. And we are a predominantly white institution. So talking about our alcohol culture, and think about what your alcohol culture looks like at Purdue, we have 50% of our undergraduate students who drink at high risk. So 50% of all of our undergraduates are drinking, having 5 or more drinks in a sitting, mostly more. We know that we attract students who come to our campus who drink at higher rates than other universities before they step foot on our campus. And then our average BAC of a student who is caught or transported to the hospital, we have a detox facility because Wisconsin is a little bit different. The university doesn't run it, but we do breathalyzers on our students. And the average BAC of a student who was caught is 0.221. For those of you that are like, what does that mean? 0.08 is the legal limit to drink and drive. 0.221 is almost 3 times that. Also, some of the other things that are characteristic of our drinking culture are most students who are not of a different race or ethnicity or have a different marginalization start drinking either their second semester of their freshman year or by their 21st birthday. And we also have a sense of entitlement around drinking, like drinking is a right. It is my right among our dominant population. So some of our environmental factors. So UW-Madison, the city of Madison is located on an isthmus. And isthmus has 2 lakes around it. Campus, we are backed onto a lake, but within the 3-mile radius of campus, which again, some of that is lake, there are 376 establishments that students can buy or sell alcohol so they can buy it around campus. On this map that's up here is sort of the red dots are bars, the yellow dots are grocery stores. And as you can see, sort of in our Wisconsin area, we have a high percentage of bars. Alcohol is also really cheap in Wisconsin. The beer tax has not changed since 1969, and that is 0.04 cents. Our state laws protect businesses, so we do not have a state municipality that runs alcohol. It's run by all the areas, and there are different laws on the books that are more protective of the business. 2 laws I will use as an example. An OWI or a DUI in other states is a felony. In Wisconsin, it is a misdemeanor, and someone can have up to 5 before their license gets suspended. Also, we also have the parent law in Wisconsin, which is a little bit different than other states. And in other states, it's you can drink with your child in the privacy of your own home. Wisconsin, like, up the ante, and in our taverns, you can drink with your parent, guardian, step-parent, grandparent, and order in a bar. So that's also, again, playing into our culture. And then within the state of Wisconsin, binge drinking is the second highest among 18 to 44-year-olds in the United States. So I always like to put in that thing of 18 to 44 to talk about like the culture. It's not just the college age students who are participating in binge drinking on our campuses. Switching gears to talk a little bit about our campus racial climate. Our campus has had a lot of racial issues over time, and I've just picked out some of the main ones that are influencing things still today, but are somewhat unresolved. In 2015, the Tony Robinson shooting. Tony Robinson was a biracial young man who got shot by a police officer in our community. And so that started bringing students' activism up in that time. And then spring of 2016, we had 55 hate and bias crimes that spring where students of color were racially harmed. There were nooses drawn. There were a Black young lady got spit on by someone who was drunk. We had swastikas get written all over places. A Native American healing circle for survivors of sexual assault was disturbed by people mocking an elder. And like the pièce de résistance was an African American student got arrested in the middle of his African American Studies course for the graffiti that is pictured in that picture. And that sent shockwaves across our campus. In fall of 2016, we had the campus noose incident at the Halloween game where someone wore an Obama mask into the stadium and someone had a noose and tied it around it. Then fall of 2019, we had all of the fallout from the homecoming video. Our homecoming committee asked for students of diverse backgrounds to participate in the video. And when the video was shown, all of the diverse students were not in it. And so that sent shockwaves across our campus. And there was protesting, there was a SIC committee, our student inclusion committee that got formed. Students made demands, there was protesting, there was tagging of places, as with the picture of UW for whites only, in retaliation, going back and forth among all groups. And finally, going to this past fall, we are in Wisconsin. Kenosha is only 2 hours from here. And so the Jacob Blake shooting, as well as from leftover things from this summer, but the Jacob Blake shooting played really big on our campus and protesting. And our campus police were found to be involved with some of the Kenosha shooting protest things, and as well as some of shooting rubber bullets and funding shooting rubber bullets on our students this summer for protesting. So our student government this fall voted no confidence in our university police department. So like I said, we have layers upon layers of things, and our campus hasn't really dealt well with them, but specifically calling out racial climate among our campus. So while you're listening to me talk about all the things on our campus, what are some things that go on at Purdue? How do you all handle racial climate? So then sort of how color of drinking started were student feedback. I went and presented our alcohol EDU data, which is our first year program, to our ASM students, and they brought up the question of, Ms. Washington, do you have any data on, how alcohol impacts like discrimination? Or like you're talking a lot about negative impacts to the drinker, but you're not talking about the drinker's impacts to the community. And part of why they were asking this question is our campus had issues of alcohol and racial climate combining, and like no one really looking at that before. And so some of these are things that we have seen over time. The Real UW was a response to 2016, where students wrote in about like things that had happened to them on campus. What we found when we analyzed some of the data, 1 out of every 5 things students reported on Twitter, Yik Yak, Facebook, where alcohol was involved as the aggressor. As you can see from some of our students about some of um, the young lady that got spit on, that was by someone who was drunk. There was a fraternity that was saying racial slurs at students while they were drunk and causing hazing issues. So we've had like a lot of issues in our campus, but you had to sort of look for them, but this was known among our students. So how I got here, like I said, the alcohol data tour, I talked to our student government. Our student government is our board of directors on our campus for the health center. So I was like, okay, I'll look into this. And so we started trying to find the field research, and there was nothing adequate about like racism or secondhand impacts of drinking, not to the drinker, but community impacts. There was very little. And we were like, well, what are we looking for? So I hired a student. Her name was Melissa. And we started trying to do focus groups with different student groups. And the Machistas, which is a Latinx subgroup, were one of our first groups. And they gave us the feedback, we ain't got time for focus groups. We're busy students. And they were like, we would possibly do this if you could do this in a survey. And my response to them was, are y'all going to check your email? They were like, we'll check out your email if you make it a short survey. So Color of Drinking 1 was born in survey form. So before I hop into all of the Color of Drinking survey results, I'm going to be referring to this booklet as well. And here's where you can find it if they didn't put it on the website. And I will send this out with the presentation also after this presentation. So on our campus, we have done 2 Color of Drinking surveys. The first Color of Drinking survey was done in 2015, and it was only done to undergraduate students of color. And we had a 10.8% completion rate, and no incentives were given. And the first Color of Drinking, we did try and go through IRB, but IRB said it wasn't research. So that's why we didn't have incentives and things. So then with Color of Drinking 2, we really wanted to publish the results because that was really important to our students. And so we did a census of our undergraduate students of color and a sample of our white undergraduates. And so we had about a 25.2% completion rate for students of color and 16.7% completion rate for our white students. And all participants who participated received a $5 Amazon gift card. So where I always start is one of the questions that we've asked in all of the Color of Drinkings is, how would you describe the alcohol culture at UW-Madison? And for those of you that are like, I want to follow along in the booklet, this is on pages 7, 18, and 19. What are themes that emerge for students of color? The alcohol culture is prevalent. The alcohol culture is how UW-Madison students socialize. The pressure to participate in the drinking culture is high. And then for our white students, the alcohol culture is how UW-Madison students socialize. The UW-Madison alcohol culture encourages drinking heavily, and participation in the alcohol culture is dependent on who you socialize with. Why I always like stop here and start here is the things that were the same for both groups. The alcohol culture is how UW-Madison students socialize. I'm going to come back to this throughout the points. And so to sort of see, this is a page from the booklet, what they were saying and how this fell into place. But I'll read one for you from a student of color. It's strong, everywhere, encouraged, supported, expected, ridiculed, and accepted all at once. Everyone does it, is a saying that applies here. Alcohol consumption is rampant across UW by students of all ages. For better or for worse, it is a cornerstone of UW. And then from a white student, practically every person I've met over the past 2 years drinks heavily and encourages the people around them to drink and party. I didn't drink before coming to UW, and now I feel pressured to drink every weekend. So to break up some of the takeaways for color of drinking, we have 4 takeaways that I will be talking about throughout the presentation. That 1, alcohol culture influences microaggressions and retention of students of color. Students of all racial identities report feeling unsafe in a high-risk drinking environment, but safety for students of color in these high-risk drinking environments is impacted more. High-risk drinking is tied to student connection and belonging, and alcohol use by white students is a protective factor for academic and social success. Allowances and exceptions are made academically to support drinkers in the alcohol culture. So, talking with our first takeaway, alcohol culture influences microaggressions and retention of students of color. So in our survey, we were the first survey on campus to ask about microaggressions as microaggressions, and we defined them as the Sue et al. Version, but only that students of color could experience them. We did not ask white students about experiencing microaggressions based on the definition. So we asked, have you ever experienced a microaggression at UW-Madison? And for 2015, it was 62%. It really didn't change in 2017 and 18 when we did color of drinking. It's 61.7%. And you'll find this information on pages 15, 22, and 23. And because students of color are not monolithic, when we look at experiencing microaggressions by group, our Black students had higher rates of experiencing microaggressions compared to everyone else. And depending on how you did the breakdown of the analysis for all you statistical people out there, Black female students had the highest rates of experiencing microaggressions. If you did it race and then gender, if you do gender then race, Asian students actually had the highest rates of experiencing microaggressions, which I think is very relevant to what we're sort of seeing in the world now. So just some things from what students talked about. And people often ask me, like, what was surprising to you here in this version is the classroom interactions of things students said they were experiencing in the classroom. I'll read you one. I've been frequently confused with other South Asian students who do not look like me by intoxicated people. One time, a very drunk white guy, a college student, told me he rules Saudi Arabia, where I am not from, and used the N-word. I've heard lots of white students use the N-word. I've frequently heard people complain about their TA's accents. I've been harassed by presumable straight white men because I'm queer. And again, talking about some of the ways identity stacked for our students. And then sort of showing one more thing from Color of Drinking 1, and this is always the quote that stuck with me a lot from Color of Drinking 1. 3 words, Cinco de Mifflin. That particular weekend was the most degrading I have ever felt on university property. 3 white males were already drinking and passed out in my dorm. I was doing laundry, and they made a comment about how that's all I was good for, doing laundry. So we also wanted to sort of start looking at retention with students. And so we asked, have you considered leaving the university? And about 30% of students of color said yes to the 20.9% of white students. And students of color were 4.5 times more likely than their white counterparts to have considered leaving the university. When we asked them their reasons, they considered leaving. For students of color, the racial climate was number 1, for our white students, the academic reasons were number one, and mental health was number two for all of them. But when we ask them straight up, alcohol ends up in the top 6 of reasons as to why students are considering leaving the university. How this stacks up to our campus climate survey, which asked, have you seriously considered leaving UW-Madison? It's a little bit about the same, but seriously. But the number one reason for students of color stayed basically the same: racial climate. Moving on to our second color of drinking takeaway, students of all racial identities report feeling unsafe in high-risk drinking environments. Safety for students of color in high-risk drinking environments is impacted more. This is on page 10 if you're following along in the booklet. Do you avoid specific areas out of the concern of alcohol use of others? Was one that we've asked on all of the color of drinkings. Students of color had about a 50% rate in 2017 of like, yeah, I avoid places. And again, when we look at the breakdown, Black students have the highest rates of I'm avoiding specific areas on or off campus due to concerns about the alcohol use of others, and followed by our multiracial students. What becomes very interesting is where for both groups. Both groups, the top 4 are basically the same area of places: fraternity and sorority housing, Langdon Street, State Street and the bars, and house parties. Well, for those of you that don't know our campus and I have a map, Langdon Street is where the majority of our IFC and Panhellenic chapters housing is. And so let's see if I can do this with my pen. So Langdon Street runs into campus. There we go. Here. And State Street is what connects campus to the Capitol. So the Capitol is 6 blocks from campus, on our campus. And so right in the middle of these 2 streets would be Memorial Library, which is the only 24/7 library. Starting here, there is a bar right here. There are bars stacking up here. There are bars here. And then like we start getting into like the bar area over here. Also, what I point out that is on Langdon, and the blue thing at the top is the lake, is the Memorial Union, which our Memorial Union has the largest outdoor bar in Wisconsin, known as the Terrace. 70% of our union sales are from alcohol. But right beside the Union, which isn't pictured here, is the Red Gym. And the Red Gym is home to a lot of our groups: the Multicultural Student Center, the Gender Sexuality Campus Center, the International Student Services Center. For our students who have different identities, that is their home. And so on our campus, since we are integrated into the city, on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night, where do students have to cross, or who do they have to come across when they're leaving to go home? So that's something that we talk about on our campus, but because of that high alcohol outlet density, and in that square by Lake Street, there are 218 bars alone in that direction. Oh, sorry, I had stars. So here are some ways students are talking about their experiences on Lincoln Street. I don't like walking by the bars on State Street or University at night. There are usually drunk people out on the street, and I don't like to get in their way, as an example. So the other thing we talked about, and this is on pages 12 and 20, is has the alcohol use impacted your health, physical, mental, overall well-being in your time you have attended UW-Madison? What became interesting is the dichotomy of where students went. Students of color talked more about mental health and safety concerns, versus white students talked more about physical and social impacts. So from a student of color, it's sad to see my peers killing themselves and makes me very anxious to be around or interact with much of the student body. Constant paranoia that I will be raped or sexually assaulted. I would like to healthily consume, but I'm afraid someone will take advantage of me. Vomit makes me sad and induces anxiety. And then from a white student, I gained weight due to my drinking. But what our university stats say about some of this? So from our Healthy Minds data, when you look at our students of color, depression is higher than their white counterparts. Anxiety for most groups is also higher than our white counterparts. And then suicidal ideation, students of color had higher rates of suicidal ideation. as well as transgender students. So then for sexual assault, women of color have higher rates, with the exception of Asian women, than our white counterparts on our campus. And we have higher than normal sexual assaults that involve alcohol use. And so majority of victims and perpetrators were ingesting alcohol together, which brings me back to that first point that we were talking about when the students defined the alcohol culture. The alcohol culture is how UW-Madison students socialize. So that brings me to the next takeaway. High-risk drinking is tied to student connection and belonging. So we asked, and this is on pages 13 and 20 in the booklet, has your personal alcohol use or the alcohol use of others impacted your overall sense of belonging at UW-Madison? What's interesting here is that 46% of students, regardless of race, said, yeah, alcohol and belonging are tied together. And so asking them how, and so these are little nuanced things. But from students of color, if you don't drink, you don't fit in at UW-Madison. Alcohol use by others makes me feel isolated. Alcohol use amplifies racial issues. And then from our white students, alcohol helps you fit in and belong. If you don't drink, you don't belong. Alcohol helps you meet new people. Drinking alcohol helps me feel like I belong at UW-Madison, and alcohol helps you bond socially. So again, seeing what they say from a student of color, the privileged culture around drinking and the idea that it is the normal thing to do and how people have fun in college makes me feel like I'm not experiencing college the way I'm supposed to, and that I don't relate to my peers. And then from a white student, I feel like you're most definitely looked down upon and considered an outsider if you do not partake in the UW-Madison drinking culture. So then how this all comes into play. From our Healthy Minds data, and I'm going to take a little time to explain the next two charts. On the vertical axis, we looked at belonging from Healthy Minds, and then we took all of the alcohol questions and sort of plotted them out. So on the vertical axis, I have a group, community, or social circle at UW-Madison where I feel I belong, feel at home, known, connected to, and supported in my identity on the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis, I see myself as part of the campus community. What this graph shows us is that students who use any alcohol and actually go towards impairment, binge drinking, and high risk have a higher sense of belonging than students who don't use, who don't binge, or have a low audit, which is the alcohol use disorders identification test. Sorry, I was messed up there. But then those students in the low sense of belonging claim are already not experienced, already have low sense of belonging. And so just the choice to drink or not drink on our campus, regardless of other factors, you're set up to have higher sense of belonging if you drink. So then when we look at belonging among the marginalized populations, and I'll talk about the colors of dots here. Green is race and identity. Yellow is sexual orientation. Red is gender identity. Pink is financial stress. Orange is registered disability. Blue is first generation status. And purple is nationality. But what you see here is that students who have marginalized identities are in that lower sense of belonging slide. And we know how this stacks. If students have two or more marginalized identities on our campus, the lower their sense of belonging is. Alcohol is the opposite. So then when we look at our campus climate survey, again, looking at just belonging overall, students of color have lower sense of belonging than white students. And our students of color are less likely to feel safe, welcome, and respected compared to white students, and more likely to feel excluded. Finally, bringing to the final takeaway. Alcohol use by white students is a protective factor for academic and social success. Allowances and exceptions are made academically to support drinkers and the alcohol culture. So this is on page 8 in the booklet if you're following along. We did look at drinker types, and some students of color do drink. We didn't say they are not abstainers, but then when we look at our white students, over 50% are what we consider high-risk drinkers on our campus, which is a trend. But we normally see students of color are more likely to not participate drinking-wise on our campus. So this is on page 10, and this is based off the Diner Flourishing Scale, which flourishing is positive well-being. And these findings have been confirmed in like 3 other surveys on our campus. But the Diner Flourishing score asks questions like, I lead a purposeful life, my social relationships are supportive, I'm interested in my daily activities, I actively contribute to the well-being of others, I am competent in the activities that are important to me, I have a good life, I am optimistic about my future, and people respect me. So what we're looking at is we took the drinker types by group, so students of color versus our white students, and then we mapped their diner flourishing score, and we capped off the top flourishing score based on research that says the top 90% of people who are flourishing are in this category. And I can talk more about that if people are really interested. But what we found is that there is a correlation for our white students around drinking, and not just drinking, high-risk drinking, and positive well-being. For our students of color, that same correlation cannot be said. So our highest risk drinkers and in color drinking, actually the problematic drinkers have the highest set of flourishing scores. If you drink more and you're white, you have higher flourishing scores than everybody. But if you're a non-user alcohol user, you have lower scores. And then for students of color, like I said, alcohol isn't correlated with flourishing for them. But then talking about other things. So this is also from our Healthy Minds data. And this is self-reported GPA, which I know some of you are like, but what does that mean? And I'll get to some real numbers too. But what we did with our Healthy Minds data and what it's showing us is that there isn't really a difference in grades or self-reported GPA from students who use alcohol and those who don't use. And there's lots of research out there, which I could go through also, where it says that the more you drink, the worse your grades are. On our campus, the alcohol users and the non-alcohol users, there's not really that much of a difference between GPA. And I know some of you are like, Orianda, this is self-reported GPA. This matches with our campus grade distribution as well. But then let me give you some real campus numbers. From our conduct office on our campus, we talk about students who are adjudicated, so students who are caught for an alcohol violation. Their average GPA was 3.8 and is consistently 3.8. Our Greek women from the Pan-Hellenic Council, whose alcohol high-risk drinking is 72%, consistently have higher GPAs than the normal regular women's trend in campus. It's part of how they recruit women into their sorority. And then our highest risk drinking residence halls, there are 20 residence halls that we have on our campus, and some have learning communities, have the highest GPAs compared to the other residence halls. So some of the other ways we see in academics and choices students have to make when it comes to alcohol on our campus is students reporting having to find alternative study space because of the alcohol culture, when being assigned group work or meetings, having to schedule around the alcohol holidays, and professors or TAs discussing alcohol in the classroom, and it's not discussing, it's making jokes or inviting them out to drink, and that one was statistically significant. So this top one is one of the quotes that has resonated with our faculty and gotten them involved in some of the things I will talk about later. It has definitely made me feel awkward in the classroom when professors or TAs consistently talk about drinking and maybe having students meet up to drink. So then we also asked about consequences to the drinker, and the students of color number is a little bit lower compared to the white student number because students of color don't drink as much as our white students do. And so being too hungover to attend class, choosing to drink instead of study, and performing poorly on an assignment, those are the ones that are statistically significant, and this is on page 17 in the booklet. Sorry, y'all. So this one's the portion of me talking about the data from our campus. So I'm going to move into some of like campus responses and some of what people have done on our campus, which there's so many more things. So some of our initial campus responses, the police at the time were one of the first groups to step up and be like, you know what? This is the second time, because Color of Drinking has 2 versions, that you have told us about students not feeling safe on Langdon Street. Our police department didn't have jurisdiction at the time of the survey. They actually worked to get jurisdiction on the street and to be able to patrol it. But for the first 45 days initiative, which is a campus initiative, of old for alcohol. They worked with the city to have a presence and to help protect students on Langdon Street. Our Red Gym, which is, I mentioned, is the hub for a lot of our cultural groups, had its first alcohol-free event open to all students. Our union serves alcohol, so events held in the union aren't considered alcohol-free. And then our housing does do alcohol-free events every weekend, but those are not open to students who don't live in housing, and only 95% of our first-year students live in housing. Housing also changed some policies. And then our Center for Leadership and Involvement had sorority and fraternities move where they load their buses, which is a small policy change. And why that's important is fraternity and sorority members would pregame before they showed up to load their buses. And instead of having them load them in front of the Red Gym, which is the cultural hub, and then go in and cause problems, they moved them down the street or had them move down the street. So also some of our strategic campus responses. Our Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs has it on the list of strategic priorities, and we're doing some great stuff with that. The Identity and Inclusion Division within Student Affairs also uses color of drinking for programmatic and strategy pieces. So for example, our social justice program, which does a lot of the social justice facilitation, incorporates pieces of color of drinking when they talk to faculty and work with student groups in building capacity to talk about social justice and address microaggressions on our campus. Fraternity and sorority life, color of drinking was a mainstay for their review. And so our Langdon Street Coalition has been built, and they're working on how do we make things safer and how do we work with fraternity and sorority life about climate as well as the drinking issues because of the environments they propose and as students feeling scared and harmed from them. Our Student Involvement Coalition, which I mentioned from the homecoming video, has used it to help further their initiatives and goals, but also like in videos that they have and their skills of that. And then for our academics, the color of drinking data is on the Healthy Academics Toolkit, which I've put the link in there. And our academic toolkit is used to help policies, practices, and pedagogies in academic context. My colleague, Dr. Quiller Barrett, is in charge of all of this, but we incorporate data to help talk about high impact practices of how staff and faculty can help have healthy environments for their students. And Claire leads that charge, but we do incorporate color of drinking data because that is very impactful for our faculty and our advisors when talking about like the needs of students in their classroom. And also the toolkit has data about students, and professors can break it down by all ways to talk about like who could be in their class and what ways could they help them. And this was an ask from our Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning. So then how have students used this? In spring of 2016, our student activists used Color of Drinking 1 to get the Our Wisconsin program, which is now mandated for all students. Our MSC staff used Color of Drinking 2 to help advocate for the APITA and Latinx cultural centers. We have a Black one and an Indigenous one, but we didn't have an APITA and Latinx. And then our alcohol bystander intervention program has started to incorporate color of drinking into having conversations with RSOs about how do you hold people accountable, because the number one issue for our RSOs is alcohol. So looking at some of the other impacts, and I'm quoting because Gabe says it better than I do in some cases, on our campus is like for the student of color experience, what color of drinking has done, and like you all can read Gabe's long quote for me, but like it gave our students of color a voice. And a lot of other surveys that we did on our campus, they get overshadowed by the white students. And that has always been a big part, but it has given them a voice and a platform. And we have been doing lots of small scale and large scale things, as well as messaging and campaigns. But it also has helped give like staff and faculty a renewed sense of focus and resolve. So sort of wrapping up, like there are lots of things Color of Drinking has done, and we still have things to do. Color of Drinking has garnered attention from our campus administrators. The survey has brought alcohol into the conversation of campus climate. It has given our administrators ways to talk about alcohol in the context of campus climate. We're working with faculty and staff to evaluate practices in the classroom, and a significant shift in thinking about health equity and allocation of resources. Instead of necessarily focusing on the high risk drinkers and putting all the resources, like we gotta deal with the drinkers, we're really looking at we're working on a recovery community in our environment. Also, how are we supporting the non-drinkers or the students who are doing the right things, instead of throwing all of this money and resources at just our high-risk drinkers, and there are services and things for them still. We didn't cut those out, but looking at how are we spending our money on our students. And again, it elevated our student voices and has laid the groundwork for intersectionality of all of our issues and conversations on our campus. So, questions, thoughts, or reactions?
Rianda, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us. Hello, everyone. I may be coming in as a shock. I am not Julie Cox. We are tag teaming this. I am Will Evans, Interim Assistant Director of Wellness Programs at Recwell. We did have some questions come through, and we do have some time to ask those. The first one, Rianda, is can you give some examples of campaign messages that have been derived from the color of drinking data? So messages that were sent out to campus.
So some of them, and like some of them are more from our I&I side. So like, I don't know everything, but like for some of the alcohol ones, we've changed instead of, and like I can give examples. I'm just trying to think of this exact one because I can't see the full thing in front of me right now. But like with our housing campaigns, we went, instead of talking about like, well, you should stop drinking and harm reduction, we're like, so how are you helping your neighbor? I think it was be a good neighbor was part of the campaign, but like, it's okay for you to drink, but well, not really. We don't condone drinking. But like, instead of saying that, it's like, when you drink, who are you impacting and what ways are you impacting things? And so like one of the ones we had was one about hate and bias, because we had like a question and like sort of being like, 97% of Celery residents don't feel like you should, with drinking, that you should, like I said, I'm quoting this badly because I don't have it in front of me. Sorry, y'all. Of like, don't feel like, alcohol use should be causing hate and violence. And that's something they don't believe. So like doing some of those social norms messages with it, but then also using like a quote from Color of Drinking that, students of color said that they didn't feel like they belonged. And so like tying it to like neighborhood practices, or like, how can you help? With a lot of our students, what's been resonating more campaign wise, alcohol side more so than like the DEI side, has been like the impacts of harm you can do. So how can we mitigate that? Instead of like, instead of us focusing on harm reduction, how are you helping the community? Or how are you mitigating harm? Because you wouldn't want someone else to feel harmed by things that you've seen in Color of Drinking. That's the thing we hear from students all the time. And so being very strategic about how we use that. And then I know from our DEI side, they've been working on the like, how do you talk about the microaggressions piece? Because they are more succinct in that. And that's where I'm like, I can't tell you all the things they have done. But that's sort of how we've been using the messaging in campaigns bigger. But like the one that comes to say is the be a good neighbor, or like, even though the police have done like the don't be that badger campaign. Or we had them rephrase it to be that badger instead of don't be that badger, because, negative pie, as my coworker would tell me.
That's awesome examples. Yeah. And I just personally love everything about this because it ties in so many other dimensions of quality of life and wellness. And I think everyone's probably familiar with, yes, everyone, or at least you should be familiar with like Title IX things like alcohol and its relationship with harassment and assault. But thinking even more beyond that, how does alcohol affect other issues on campus, like belonging and a sense of inclusion and things like that? So another question we have was, have you seen similar effects with other drug use types, or have you done investigations into other drug use types in a similar way?
We have done some investigations into other drug use types, but because our campus doesn't use drugs as much, like I know like the other drugs are part of my job, but they don't use them as much, and we don't have need. Like we've had state coalitions sort of get mad at us because they're like, you don't have the need for us to give you the Narcan. We do have Narcan in the pharmacies, but it's like, we have a grant, we want to give this to you, but you just don't have the student need. And the higher end drugs are with the students who have the most wealth and my friends who are fraternity and sorority life members, the cocaine. And so we've been doing more with them and working with one of our counselors. But like, because we don't see it, it's not high in our student body use, but we are seeing it in other ways that we're working on doing some other things. So my brilliant colleague, who is also the PI of the study, Dr. Marconi, did a morbidity and mortality study on our campus, looking at all of the students who have died in the past 25 years, working with like the CDC to look at what was their cause of death on the death certificate, not necessarily what was in the papers. And so what we've been finding is that's where the drugs tend to show up. And again, it's only a few amount of students who have died from other substances in an overdose form. And so that's what we're trying to do some more work working backwards for those. And then how do we find these students? Because they are so small. Like all of our numbers are like, it's below 5% of some of the harder drugs, sometimes too. And it's like, it's not that we're not focusing on them. It's not that we don't want to focus on them. And like marijuana is its own issue in itself because of the possible legalization and all of that, because that becomes the other thing that's large, but not the same outcomes as some of the harder substances.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. I think a question that may be on a lot of people's minds is this survey a tool that other campuses can use?
Right now, we're working with lots of other campuses. Like the survey is available for free. It's not that like mind inspiring, but I'm consulting with some. But so right now, Delaware is actually doing it as a test. And then Chapel Hill, and I talk to Nebraska next week. So it is adaptable. So other campuses are doing it. You can consult with me. I'm available to talk through it, or how you could adapt color drinking for your own campus.
Awesome. Great. And we have time for maybe one or two more. Someone was curious as to the initial reaction from faculty and staff when this data was first shared. Was it welcomely received, or was there some anticipation and lots of discussion about how do we disseminate this information to campus? What was that like?
So like the initial faculty have always just been like, wow, like no one's brought it up in this context. It's like, it's an issue we know is here, but until someone brings like specific attention, because for some of our faculty and staff, them like talking about alcohol is like, that's how we relate. And because they can go have drinks and office hours on the terrace, it becomes a little bit blurry. But for most part, faculty have been like, oh, when you're putting it that way, and it becomes the business argument, not necessarily that you should do this because it's the right thing or it's bad, or like, you know, it's the students you say you want to keep, you're alienating when you're talking about alcohol and you're making them feel uncomfortable. Is there ways that we can do better, or do other ways that you can relate to your students? And so they've actually been very active in it, and our advisors also. Like that one quote from the Color of Drinking one is the one that sticks for faculty and staff and gets them to be like, oh, we do that. And so what ways can we change our behavior? And so we've been working like on our campus. Like I said, Dr. Claire Barrett is amazing. She's our academics person in health. And so she works with all of the faculty and staff on like, what are high impact practices you can do inside the classroom? What are ways we can help foster health and well-being inside the classroom? And she will even tell you the Color of Drinking quotes get faculty more on page than some of the other stuff.
That's awesome. Well, we are going to, if we didn't get to your questions, I apologize. We are running up against time right here. We just want to say thank you for joining us for this Lunch and Learn session. And please, all of you at home, please join me in sending a very warm virtual thank you to our presenter today for leading this presentation. Hopefully you got lots of good insight on how you can apply this. I certainly did with our interactions with students, and just some further food for thought and how we approach a very big topic on campus, such as alcohol consumption and how that may be impacting others. For our grant funders, it is important that we receive feedback from our attendees, and we ask that you provide feedback on the session by clicking on the feedback link just below this video, and we thank you for doing that. If you would like to join us for future sessions, you can scroll down further on this page and see the complete schedule and register to join us for upcoming sessions. Our next one is scheduled for Thursday, April 15th, and the session is titled Alcohol and Prescription Drug Abuse on Campus, Insights from Students. This will be a student panel, so our students will be giving us their perspective on prescription drug abuse on campus. Again, we thank you for joining. Thank you, Rihanna, for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to give us more information on this topic. We hope everyone here has a wonderful afternoon. In the future, come back to this site. All resources mentioned in this presentation, the booklet, the discussion questions, and a recording of this presentation will be available on this site as well. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.